3:57 in the afternoon in Washington. The rain came down. The scoreboard froze. Jessica Pegula, 6-4 in the first set. Eala, 2-1 up in the second. Nobody serving, nobody moving. Just an empty court in Rock Creek Park and a sky that refused to quit. And on the other side of the planet, at 4 in the morning, an entire country refused to go to bed. Think about what that actually means. This final was supposed to start at midnight Philippine time. Midnight. People set alarms, people made coffee, and then they waited 3 hours in the dark while groundskeepers dragged tarps across a tennis court 7,000 miles away. The players finally walked out around 3 in the morning, Manila time. 53 minutes of tennis later, the lightning came back, and it was over for the night, officially postponed at 9:06, 53 minutes. That is what 115 million people stayed up for. And here is the part that should tell you everything. Almost nobody went to sleep after. So, if you were one of them, if you sat there at 4 in the morning staring at a rain delay feed and asking yourself what you were doing with your life, I want you to hear this clearly. You were right to stay up. You were watching something that has never happened before. Because Eala is 21 years old, ranked number 28 in the world, and she is currently 1 set and change away from a title her entire country has never won. Not her, her country. In 54 years of professional women's tennis, the Philippines had never produced a champion at this level. Never even come close, until very recently. And 9 years ago, this same person was a kid at an airport in Quezon City, holding a one-way ticket to an island in Spain where she did not speak the language and did not know a single person. So how does that happen? How does a country with no tennis system, no clay court culture, no blueprint, no precedent whatsoever, end up with a player standing across the net from the number 3 player in the world with a trophy on the line? That is not luck. Luck does not survive 9 years. But to understand why a rain delay in Washington can shut down a nation of 115 million people, you have to go back to that airport, and to the decision her family made that sounds completely insane when you say it out loud. The Philippines has produced world champions. Manny Pacquiao became a national religion. Basketball is not a sport there. It is a language, played on concrete courts wedged between houses in every barangay in the country. What the Philippines had never produced was a woman who could win a professional tennis match at the highest level of the sport. Not once. Not in 54 years of the WTA Tour existing. There was no academy system. No junior pipeline feeding into Europe. No former pro-turned-coach who knew what the road actually looked like. If you were a talented Filipino kid with a racket in 2015, there was no next step because nobody had ever built one. Alexandra Eala was born on the 23rd of May 2005 in Quezon City, and when it became obvious that she was good, her family looked at that empty map and did something that most parents would never do. They sent her away. Mallorca, Spain. The Rafa Nadal Academy. 7,000 miles from her mother, from her food, from her friends, from every single familiar thing in her life. She was a young teenager. Not a prodigy on a poster. A kid. And I want to be careful how I frame this, because it is easy to hear Rafa Nadal Academy and think privilege. That is not the story. The story is a family concluding that their daughter could not become what she was capable of becoming inside her own country, and choosing to break the family apart geographically to give her a chance. That is not privilege. That is a bet with everything on the table. So picture the reality of it, not the highlight reel. Calling home across a 6-hour time zone gap, which means you talk to your mother when she is winding down and you are just starting your day. Eating dinner that looks nothing like the dinner you grew up on. Training in a language you are still assembling word by word. And losing. Losing constantly. In ITF tournaments in towns nobody has heard of. In front of maybe 40 people and a folding chair umpire. Here is the number that captures those years better than anything. In July of 2024, her career high ranking was 143 in the world. 143. She was 19 years old. 6 years into the bet, and she was the 143rd best player on Earth, which sounds respectable until you understand what it means practically. It means you are not in Grand Slam main draws. It means you are flying economy to qualifying rounds. It means you are good and completely invisible. And this is the part of her story that I think gets skipped, because it is the least dramatic and the most important. Somewhere in those years, she had an exit available to her. She could have gone home. Think about it. She was already, by an enormous margin, the best tennis player the Philippines had. She could have flown back to Manila at 18, played regional events, been a genuine national celebrity, and lived a comfortable, admired, completely reasonable life as a big fish in a small pond. Nobody would have criticized her. Most people would have called it a triumph. She stayed in Mallorca. She stayed at 143. She kept losing to players you have never heard of in towns you cannot find. And that decision, made quietly, with no audience, in a year nobody was filming, is the actual reason 115 million people were awake at 4 in the morning last night. If that lands with you at all, if you know what it costs to leave home for something that might not work, do me a favor and hit subscribe before we go further. Not for the channel, because the rest of this story is going to keep unfolding over the next few years, and you are going to want to be here when it does. For 6 years, the bet worked. Slowly, quietly, nobody watching. And then, in the space of about 18 months, it nearly destroyed her. The 28th of June, 2025. Eastbourne, England. Third set tiebreak. Alex Eala is standing 4 points away from becoming the first Filipina in history to win a WTA title. Let me set the scene properly, because this is the night that everything else in her career gets measured against. She had come through qualifying to even be in the draw, surviving a 3-set war against Hailey Baptiste that went to a tiebreak in the deciding set. Then she beat Lucia Bronzetti. Then she beat the 3rd seed, Yelena Ostapenko, a Grand Slam champion. Then Diana Yastremska. Then Varvara Gracheva. 5 wins from a player ranked outside the top 50. On grass, a surface she had barely played on in her life. And she got there. The final. The first player from the Philippines to reach a WTA final in the tour's 54-year history. The first player from Southeast Asia to reach one since Tamarine Tanasugarn in 2010. 15 years, an entire region of the world, nobody. Across the net was Maya Joint of Australia. Eala lost the first set 6-4. She took the second set 6-1, and she took it violently. And then the third set went all the way to a tiebreak. And inside that tiebreak, she arrived at championship point. Once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. She had 4 separate opportunities to close it, 4 moments where one ball, one forehand, one serve stood between her and a piece of history that nobody from her country had ever touched. Maya Joint saved every single one of them. The tiebreak went to 12 points to 10. Eala lost the match 7-6 in the third. 4 championship points, 0 converted. So here is the question I want you to hold on to, because we come back to it later, and it matters more than any statistic in this video. When you get that close, and you miss 4 times, how do you ever trust yourself in that moment again? Because most players do not. That is the honest answer. Careers get quietly redirected by nights like that. The body remembers. You reach the same moment 18 months later, and something in your arm knows what happened last time. But that is only the first layer of what those 18 months did to her. Here is the second one, and it is stranger. Her 2025 season was a genuine breakout. Miami, as a wild card, she beat the 5th seed Madison Keys and then the 2nd seed Iga Swiatek back-to-back and reached the semi-final of a WTA 1000. First player from the Philippines to ever do that. First player from the Philippines to enter the world top 100. Full stop. She finished that year at a career high of number 50. Then she won her first WTA 125 title in Guadalajara. Everything was ascending. And then the ranking system did something to her that almost nobody outside tennis understands. March 2026. She reaches the fourth round of Indian Wells. On March 16th, she sets a new career high, number 29 in the world, top 30 for the first time in Philippine history. 2 weeks later, she reaches the fourth round of Miami again, playing better tennis than she played the year before. On March 30th, her ranking dropped to 45. Read that again. She played well, she went deeper into a draw than most people expected, and she fell 16 places because the enormous points from that magical Miami semifinal in 2025 expired, and the fourth round result did not come close to replacing them. That is how the system works. You defend your best moment or you fall, which means the reward for having a breakout year is that the following year you have to be better than your best just to stand still. She was better, and the numbers said worse. Imagine what that does to a 20-year-old who is being told by an entire nation that she is ascending. And that brings us to the third layer, which is the heaviest one. ESPN wrote something about her earlier this year that I have not been able to get out of my head. They compared her to Manny Pacquiao, not in terms of ability, obviously. In terms of what she had become, she was no longer just a Filipino athlete. She had become a spectacle, a national event. Reporting on the homecoming she received described it as the warmest reception given to any Filipino athlete this year. So process what she is now carrying. Every service toss she makes, she is carrying the hopes of 115 million people who have waited 54 years in a sport their country has never won anything in, on a body that has already failed at the last hurdle once, on 4 separate championship points, in a ranking system that punishes her for her own best week. And she is 20 years old. And she has never won a WTA Tour title in her life. That is who walked onto the grass at Wimbledon a few weeks later, a player who had come closer than anyone from her country ever had, and still had absolutely nothing to show for it. Nobody expected what happened next, least of all the defending champion. Wimbledon, third round. Center stage against Iga Swiatek, the defending champion number 3 in the world. First set goes to a tiebreak. And I need you to notice the shape of what is happening here, because it is the exact same shape as Eastbourne. A tiebreak. A moment of history hanging on individual points. A better-ranked opponent across the net. The same room she had already failed in. The tiebreak went long. 7-6, and the score in brackets was 9, which means it ran all the way to 11 points to 9, which means there were multiple set points in there, which means she stood in that exact place again, the place where 4 championship points had evaporated a year earlier, and this time she held the racket steady. She won the tiebreak. Then she won the second set, 6-2, and the defending Wimbledon champion's title defense was over. Now here is where I want to slow down, because most coverage of that match got the meaning of it wrong. The takeaway everybody reached for was, Eala beats a top player, look how far she has come. And that reading is lazy, because she had already beaten Swiatek in Miami in 2025 as a wild card. That was not new information. Beating great players was already something Alex Eala did, so that match was not proof that she could hit the ball with elite players. It was proof of something much rarer and much harder to acquire. She won the moment, not the match. The moment. The specific psychological room that had beaten her in Eastbourne, the tiebreak with history sitting on the baseline, the situation where the entire result compresses down into 3 or 4 points, and your nervous system decides who you are. That room had already defeated her once, decisively, 4 times in the space of about 90 seconds, and she walked back into it 14 months later and came out the other side. That is not a technical improvement. You cannot drill that. Your forehand does not know what round it is. Here is the way I have come to think about it. Learning to play big points is like learning to speak a second language. For years you are translating. Someone says something, you convert it into your first language in your head. You build the answer in your first language, you convert it back, you speak. It works, but it is slow, and under pressure it collapses completely because pressure removes the time you were using to translate. And then one day, without any specific event marking it, you stop translating. You just think in the language. That is what happened to Alex Eala somewhere between Eastbourne and Wimbledon. She stopped translating pressure. She stopped having to convert a big point into a set of instructions and then execute the instructions. She just played the point. And once you see it that way, the entire grass season stops looking like a hot streak and starts looking like a system coming online. Look at the sequence. She won the Birmingham title, then Berlin, where she reached the semi-final by beating two separate top 10 opponents in the same tournament, then Wimbledon, where she took out the defending champion and reached the fourth round before losing to the 13th seed Jasmine Paolini. That is not a lucky week. That is 3 tournaments in a row where the level held. And it is worth pausing on the ranking math here, because it inverts everything I told you in the last section. Remember when the system punished her? When she played better and dropped from 29 to 45? By late July, she was back at number 28 in the world, a new career high. She had absorbed the punishment and climbed straight back through it. So if you have made it this far with me, I actually want to hear from you on this, because it is the thing I keep going back and forth on. Do you think the Swiatek tiebreak at Wimbledon was the turning point? Or do you think it was Eastbourne, and the 4 missed championship points were the price of admission for everything after? Put it in the comments. I read them, and this one genuinely does not have an obvious answer. Because there is a version of this story where losing Eastbourne is the best thing that ever happened to her, where you cannot learn to win the moment without first losing it in the most painful way available. 3 weeks after Wimbledon, she landed in Washington, D.C. I have looked at the draw she came through several times now, and I still find it slightly difficult to believe. Here is the run. I am going to give it to you in order, and I want you to keep count of what she actually walked through. First match of the tournament, Zheng Qinwen, the Olympic gold medalist. Eala had to come from behind to win it. Round of 16. Leylah Fernandez, the defending champion of the tournament. Gone. Quarterfinal. Elina Svitolina, the second seed. Swept. Semi-final. Naomi Osaka, 4-time Grand Slam champion. 2 Australian Opens, 2 US Opens. 6-4, 6-2. Count them. An Olympic champion. A defending champion. The second seed. A 4-time major champion. 4 champions in 4 matches, in 7 days, on a hard court, by a 21-year-old ranked number 28 in the world. Alex Eala did not sneak into this final. She kicked the door in, and put that beside where she was 2 years ago. July 2024. Career high 143. Now, 28. That is 115 places. And the players she is beating are not people ranked 115 places better on paper. They are people with Olympic gold and Grand Slam trophies. So now let us go back to the frozen scoreboard, because this is where I think everybody covering this final is reading the numbers wrong. Pegula 6-4, 1-2. Eala lost the first set. On the surface, that looks like the number 3 player in the world doing what the number 3 player in the world is supposed to do. Look closer at the 53 minutes they actually played. Pegula hit 14 winners. Eala hit 4. 14-4, which sounds catastrophic. And if that were the only number, I would agree with you. But both players hit exactly 20 unforced errors. 20 each. Identical. Sit with what that combination means, because it is the single most useful piece of information in this entire match. Eala was not collapsing. She was not spraying balls into the back fence. She was not choking. She was not overwhelmed. She was not being run off the court. Her error count was the same as the world number 3's error count. She was being out-hit. That is a completely different problem from falling apart, and it is a completely different problem to solve. Here is why the distinction matters so much. If a player is unraveling mentally, a 5-hour rain delay is the worst thing that can happen to them, because it gives the doubt time to grow teeth. But if a player is holding steady and simply losing a pattern of play, a 5-hour delay is a coaching session. It is a chance to look at the tape, find the leak, and come back out with a different plan. And there is a specific leak, sitting right there in the numbers. Second serve points. Pegula won 7 of 13 behind her second serve. Eala won 3 of 9. 3 of 9. That is 33% against a top 3 player who is punishing anything soft. Break points tell the same story. Pegula converted 2 of 3. Eala converted 1 of 4. Those are not personality traits. Those are adjustable. Serve placement, first serve percentage, second serve depth, court position on the return. Those are the things you fix at a changeover, let alone with an overnight suspension and a full coaching team. Now the last piece. And this is the one almost nobody is bringing up. They have played each other once before. Miami, 2025, the semifinal, when Eala was a wild card ranked outside the top 100. Pegula won it 7-6 in the first, then 6-3 in the third. But look at the middle set. Eala won it 7-5. She has already taken a set off Jessica Pegula. Not in an exhibition, not in a small event. In the semi-final of a WTA 1000, as a teenager who had no business being on that court, she has done it from further behind than she is right now. So put all of it together and go back to the question I asked at the very start of this video. How does a country with no tennis system, no precedent, no pipeline, end up one set and change away from a title? The answer is that there was never any such thing as a country with no pipeline. There was one family who built a pipeline of exactly one person, out of a plane ticket and 9 years. And it turns out that is enough. And that is what makes the resumption so strange to think about. When those two players walk back out at noon in Washington, Pegula serving at 1-2 in the second set, the numbers say this is not a player being overwhelmed by the occasion. The numbers say this is a player who lost a close set to the number 3 in the world and then broke serve to lead the second, which raises a question that is much bigger than who lifts a trophy in Washington. I am going to be honest with you. As I am recording this, nobody knows how this final ends. They walk back out at noon in Washington. Pegula serves at 1-2 in the second. It could go either way, and anyone who tells you they know is guessing. But here is what I realized watching an entire country sit up all night for 53 minutes of tennis. The trophy was never the whole point. Look at what is already permanent. First player from the Philippines to enter the world top 100. First to reach a WTA 1000 semifinal. First to reach a WTA final in the tour's 54-year history. First from Southeast Asia to do it in 15 years. Career high number 28 in the world at 21 years old, wins over an Olympic champion, a defending Wimbledon champion, and a 4-time major winner, all inside about a month. Rain cannot take any of that away, neither can a scoreline. And here is the part that outlives all of it anyway. 9 years ago, a family in Quezon City looked at a map with no route on it and had to invent one from scratch, because being a Filipino kid who loved tennis meant loving something that led nowhere. That map is not blank anymore. Somewhere in Manila right now, there is a 10-year-old who watched a woman with a Filipino surname beat Naomi Osaka on a Sunday. She is not asking whether tennis is for people like her. That question got answered while she was watching. She is asking something much more practical and much more dangerous. She is asking how. That is what Alex Eala has actually built. Not a trophy. A road that exists whether or not she is on it. So let me leave the rain where it belongs. 115 million people set alarms for midnight, waited 3 hours in the dark, watched 53 minutes, got rained out, and then stayed awake anyway. That is not an inconvenience. That is evidence. You do not lose a night of sleep over a tennis match. You lose it over something that means something. 54 years, and nobody from the Philippines had ever reached a WTA final. Now she is in one, and she is 21 years old, and the ceiling is nowhere in sight. So the real question is not whether she wins in Washington. It is how many more of these mornings the rest of us are going to lose sleep over. How many more 4 a.m. alarms? How many more finals? How many more moments where a country that was never supposed to be in this conversation is suddenly the loudest voice in it? We are going to find out together, and we are going to cover every single one of them here. The finish of this match, whatever comes next in Toronto, all of it. So if you want to be in the room when the answer arrives, subscribe and stay with me. Because whatever happens at noon in Washington, the story does not end there. It barely started.